And I remember literally crawling over to the bookshelf and putting my hands on that book. I don't know why. I just put my hands on that book and I started reading it. And the checklist, it had a checklist in it. And I started checking things off and realizing, oh my gosh. And everything I was reading was me. It was that epiphany that many of us have when we finally realize that, yeah, this might be true. There might be something to this. We're not alone. It's scary. It's new, but it's kind of a relief. It's a relief knowing that you're not crazy. So I decided I was going to get the diagnosis at that point. And this was very late in life, very late. I had been working both as a career counselor and coach and having started the business for 20 years or so.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Organizing an ADHD Brain. I'm your host, Megs. I am a professional organizer and coach, and I specialize in helping late diagnosed women with ADHD embrace their neurodiversity so we can find ways to thrive in this life and create a life that celebrates your unique way of thinking. You can expect a new episode to drop every Monday, and sometimes too if the podcast gets a little too long. I started this podcast because I felt lost when I got diagnosed with ADHD a little over 2 years ago. I didn't feel like anyone else was going through the same thing. Now that I know so much, I realize there are so many other women experiencing what I experienced, and I want to make sure that they don't go through it alone. And now that I know so much, I want to share what I know. So that way you don't have to do all the work that I did. You don't have to start your own podcast. I've done it for you. So just listen along and I'll continue to make episodes that make sense for you and your brain. Now listen along and let's go unleash those superpowers. Hey, beautiful people. How are you this week? Welcome back. I am going to be sharing with you an interview with my new friend, Shell. She is a career coach with ADHD, and we talk a lot about ADHD in the workplace and what that looks like. This is going to be a two-parter because our interview went a little long and it just makes sense to break things up. So part 1 is dropping today on Monday, and I'll drop a part 2 on Wednesday of this week. Shell is pretty amazing. She lived undiagnosed with ADHD prior to 2010, and she found out about her diagnosis into adulthood. She talks a little bit about going back into career counseling in the podcast today, and she ended up writing a book called A Course for ADHD Adults and Teens, Unlock Your Career Path. I'll go ahead and drop a link in the show notes below. She was actually trained by the gentleman who wrote What Color Is Your Parachute? And after using it to help people with ADHD, she just realized there was so much that was missing as far as specific aids to help people with ADHD. So she redesigned the work so that it could cater with people specifically who had our unique brain type. I highly recommend working with a career coach wherever you are in your career, whether you're working on staying in the same place, same company that you're working in, but you want to be doing something else, or if you're trying to branch out and do something new. I worked with a career coach before I left the corporate world, and it was one of the best things that I could have ever done for myself. And Shell has some really beautiful things to share. I am excited to jump into this interview. One of my friends has a podcast called The Fierce Framework. Her name is Mary Beth, and her and I talk about being a mom, being selfish. She's not a mom herself, but we talk a lot about what it looks like to fill up your cup first so that the whole world shines around you and everyone else gets to benefit. So I'll drop a link to that below. Next week, I'd really like to do a podcast on schedule organization and what that looks like for someone with ADHD and how you get in front of that to plan your day out in a way that really helps you. A lot of us are overachievers. A lot of us have 80 million things on our to-do list, and it never gets shorter. It always gets longer. And what do we do with all that stuff? How do we figure out what to do with that stuff so we feel like we actually have time to take care of ourselves? One thing I have noticed with my own ADHD is when I actually focus on what I'm doing and take the time to be mindful throughout the day. And this comes from my interview with Jenna. A couple weeks ago, we talk about just kind of doing the dishes and just not rushing through it. And it's been really incredible how that's been so helpful in my own life. And even just giving myself a little bit more grace and being proud of the little things that I'm accomplishing, because those little things add up to something so huge. And when it comes to decluttering as well, if you've listened to any of those podcasts where we talk specifically about taking 15 minutes a day or 10 minutes a day to declutter your home, that's all it takes to start making progress towards the life that you want to live. I always wanted to be more of a minimalist myself, but looking around at all the stuff, I never thought that was a possibility in my life. Now that I have made so much progress toward that, I have adopted what I view as my own form of minimalism. I still like stuff, but I don't have nearly as much, which was distracting my brain from all the things that I wanted to get accomplished in life. I am so proud to announce that this podcast, the one you're listening to right now, is officially the 25th episode dropped in Organizing an ADHD Brain. And in the month of June, we actually doubled our downloads from where we had been at the end of May. I am so proud. I want you to know that you're not alone with your ADHD diagnosis, and you can absolutely be organized. It just takes a little bit of patience and understanding your brain, which is something we'll continue to talk more and more about. In the episode today, we even talk about a term called body doubling. If you're trying to get something done and you are having a lot of trouble doing it, right? You feel that paralysis that often comes with ADHD and our executive function not working effectively, then get someone in the room with you, maybe even on Zoom, and say, hey, this is what I'm trying to do. Can you hold me accountable to it? I'm going to, turn off my camera for an hour, or I'm going to go get this done for an hour. It is incredible what you can get done when someone is there just sitting with you. And they don't even necessarily have to ask you any questions. You just, at the end of the hour, or however much time that you sat with them, you just show up and say, hey, this is what I got done. And they could care less, honestly, right? This is more for you than it is for them. But find a body double, because there's nothing like having someone there as you start to work through stuff. There's more science behind it too. I'll see if I can find an article and drop it in the show notes below so you can see what that looks like. Please leave a review for the podcast. The more reviews we have, the easier it is for people to find us. Go ahead and pause the podcast right now. If you're on Apple, scroll down to the bottom of the show, rate the podcast, and you can write in a little note. In addition to that, you can send us a text message. There is a button right in the show notes where it says send a text message, and then you can send a text message. If you want to show the podcast support in any other way, I do have a Patreon that is subscription based. The link is also in the show notes below. You can also support us by clicking on the link for HelloFresh and sending a free box to yourself for meals for the week. I really like it because with so many other things going on, meal planning was always such a stressful thing for me. I always wanted to try something new, make sure that we were eating vegetables, but also I'm not the greatest cook in the world. So going into HelloFresh, clicking on the meals that I want that I know my husband will like as well has been a game changer. So we pick 3 meals for the week. We find that that's our magic number because otherwise the 4th one typically doesn't get used. We get them sent to us every Wednesday. So check that out below as well. Without further ado, let's jump into this interview. Welcome back to Organizing an ADHD Brain. I'm your host, Megs, and I am so thrilled to be joined by Shell Mendelson today. She is an author, she is a coach, and she has so much more to share. I can't wait to dive into this interview. But Shell, tell us a little bit about you.
Well, thank you for that introduction, Megs. My name is Shell Mendelson, and I am an ADHD career coach. My background is all things career, and it has been for about 35 years now. That's what my education is. That's where all my training is. My ADHD specialization came later in life. So probably 15 years ago, I've been working exclusively with people with ADHD. What we talk about is literally good for anybody. You can be neurotypical. The information is going to be useful literally for everyone. Because I always say what's good for people with ADHD is good for everybody. Only because we need things broken down. We need them to be engaging. Basically, the work I do applies to pretty much everyone, but specifically very much for people with ADHD.
Ugh, I love that so much. And my listeners know that I left my corporate career last July, and that was a huge transition for me. So I'm excited to talk to you a little bit more about the ADHD journey when it comes to career paths. But first, tell us, how did you find out that you had ADHD? Because it was later in life, which is so common amongst women nowadays.
Yeah, I didn't know how to name it. I knew I was different. I always felt like an outsider in any of the jobs I had, except for when I started working in my field. Pretty much whenever I was working in the field that I love, which is career related, as a career professional, I felt very much like I fit in and I felt almost like a superstar in my field because it's what I love doing. It was only until I started a company that veered off the path of doing what I love to do something that I now call a mission. It was not really my life's work. It was a mission that I felt like I needed. As many people with ADHD who get these brainstorms about starting companies and doing things, we have these brainstorms that we feel really attracted to it and energized to do it. I ended up putting together a franchise system that was successful in 39 states and 15 countries. And that took me off course for about 6 or 7 years, during which time I loved putting things together. I loved the creative aspect of it until I had to deal with the day to day on a regular basis. And then it really dawned on me after working in the career field for so long that I was no longer enjoying the work that I had created from this company. I had literally created a corporate entity, and I never liked working in corporate entities. But here I was surrounded by neurotypical people, and I was undiagnosed. So everything went haywire when the walls started kind of coming down around my actual enjoyment and fulfillment from what I was doing. And I think other people will be able to relate to this. The start of these creative endeavors can be very enjoyable. And you think, oh, I'm onto something kind of cool. And what I help people with is design their roadmap. Well, I wasn't even looking at mine at the time. I just knew that I wasn't happy anymore. And I was dreading the day to day, dreading it. It felt like an albatross, ball and chain, whatever you want to call it. I was miserable. And so things started falling apart. And they just crashed. They literally crashed. And I left that company and it wasn't in a good way. So I don't like to go much beyond that because it was very painful time in my life. I didn't know at the time that I had ADHD and that was contributing. And I was aware that I wasn't happy doing the work. So after I knew something was really wrong at that point, and I went crawling over to a book that somebody had sent me. I love telling this story. A friend of mine who's a therapist, okay, sent me a book 2 years earlier on ADHD. She knew I had it, but she never said anything to me.
Yeah.
She just sent me this book, right? So I took the book. I just laughed because I didn't know adults had ADHD, for one thing. I put it in the drawer and that was it. So since that time, in the following 2 years, I ended up ending my work with the company I had founded and getting a divorce. Okay. So everything happened. Yeah. Everything was just kind of crashing down all at once. And I remember literally crawling over to the bookshelf and putting my hands on that book. I don't know why. I just put my hands on that book and I started reading it. And the checklist, it had a checklist in it. And I started checking things off and realizing, oh my gosh. And everything I was reading was me. It was that epiphany that many of us have when we finally realize that, yeah, this might be true. There might be something to this. We're not alone. It's scary. It's new, but it's kind of a relief. It's a relief knowing that you're not crazy. So I decided I was going to get the diagnosis at that point. And this was very late in life, very late. I had been working both as a career counselor and coach and having started the business for 20 years or so. So I went back to doing the career coaching, and it was like everything lifted. The calm came. I was back home again. I was where I was supposed to be. And I never left. I haven't left since. And it was then that I started working with individuals with ADHD. And I got the diagnosis, and that really solidified things for me. I always tell people, if it looks like a duck, go get the diagnosis.
Absolutely. It's so interesting too, because when I got diagnosed, I didn't know what that meant. I had a really hard time coming to terms with it because it wasn't as if I got the diagnosis and my doctor was like, you should check out what executive function means, right? I just got the diagnosis and now I'm like, I don't even know what ADHD means. So there was a lot of
Yeah.
acceptance in that for me. How did
Yeah.
you get to the point where you could work with your brain and understand how it works a little bit so that you can flow with it instead of working against it?
One of the things I realized is that I couldn't work for other people. I had stopped working for other people except for when I created my own company. And then I was working with other people, which actually was working for them as well, because they were neurotypical and they were making demands on me that I was uncomfortable with. And I couldn't understand what they were looking for. And I thought, well, I'm the founder of this company. I know what I'm doing. I had visions about the way I thought things should go. And I had a hard time communicating my ideas and getting buy-in. So it was very, very difficult. And I had people that were very, what you see is what you get, very linear thinking, right? Neurotypical.
Mhm.
The way I came up with the idea for the company and the way I started the whole thing was kind of the way I always thought. It's like, I have an idea. We need to look at it because the one I had here worked. We were successful. We were in 39 states. I think at the time I left, we had 62 franchises, something like that, and 15
Wow.
international, including China. China was our first international. So we were fairly successful with the company, but I wasn't happy. So you can be successful and not happy simultaneously. And that's kind of where it went. But at that time, I was working from home, and I started working from home even before my son was born. So I was kind of always working hybrid. Like I always had jobs where I could work hybrid from way back before it was even a thing, right? And that was always how I had to work. I knew what I needed to do for myself to produce the best product. I was aware of all that. And then I got the diagnosis and everything shifted. I went back to doing the work that I love doing. And everything happened because I wasn't happy in my work. That's how I came to the conclusion that I needed to get something was off, something was wrong.
Quick interruption in the show today to remind you to go leave a review for Organizing an ADHD Brain and to share with you one of the latest reviews that we've gotten. This review is called Such a Gift. Megs is such a gift to this world. Her interviews with her guests are insightful and help me feel seen every time. This podcast is wonderful for those that have ADHD, but also those that love or work with people with ADHD. Thanks, Megs. That is so awesome. Thank you so much for the love. I really appreciate it. And it really helps our podcast be seen more and more. Back to the show. I love that you found your passion back in your career coaching as well. And it's like you were coming back home as you described, which is beautiful.
Yes. Yes.
So how did
Yes.
that work out, developing your own company, your own coaching program, and then writing a book? How did that come together after leaving a company that you had worked to build and it didn't work out the way that you wanted to?
Yes. Well, there were a lot of ups and downs, let me tell you. I mean, I ended up getting trained by Richard Bowles, who wrote What Color is Your Parachute? And that was the next step in my career, was to find a process that I could use with clients. The first 10 years in my profession, I worked in vocational rehabilitation for a couple of companies, but I always knew I really didn't want to work for a company. So I actually went independent while I was doing vocational rehabilitation. And that's when I never went back. And that was, gosh, in the 1980s, before probably you were born. Yeah. But I went through training, developed the process, and began using it with my clients. It was very, very successful using it. And then I started the other company, so it took me away from that. Coming back, though, after the diagnosis, that's when I realized that I had to tweak the program I was using for people with ADHD because the parachute program that I was using was it really does work for everyone. But the workbook I was using was very confusing and I had to tweak it a lot. I had to add to it. Just so much explaining that I said, you know what? It took me a few years to finally say you're going to have to write the book. And that's when I also created the 8-week masterclass. That was about 3.5 years ago, because I realized that when people work in groups through this kind of a process, they have a cohort to work with, they have interaction with each other, and it gives them the process within a period of time that in a structure to get everything done.
Oh, that's really cool. I love that because it's got like
Yeah,
that element of body doubling in it. When you're working with someone who's
body
working towards the
doubling.
similar goal, that is
Hmm.
so helpful. So,
Yes, and in fact, as part of the 8-week program, everyone is required to form what I call off-campus group. We work on Zoom, and then they work off campus as to do things like body doubling and networking with
cool.
each other. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
So,
so great. That's key because then
mhm.
you can talk about a lot of the different things that you're going through too to make it more relatable and make it just more
Yes.
realistic. It's not all sunshine and rainbows, but when you're working with other people, it feels better.
Yeah. One other aspect of it is the outside influences that impact people. So one of the things I always have people do is I put them in a career bubble, I call it, where I tell them you're not to speak with anyone during this period of time that you're going through this process, other than the people in the class, because of the outside influences. All you need is one eye roll, somebody saying, have you thought of this? Somebody getting stressed out because they think you're headed in a direction that's going to impact them in some way, especially a spouse. You have to be insulated enough. And you also have to have people to talk about all this with, right? So that would be other people in the group. That's a big piece of it, is sort of keeping yourself insulated to give yourself the opportunity to really understand who you are and what you need, and to begin to look at what's real for you, what's authentic for you.
Oh my gosh. I am obsessed with the idea of a career bubble. And for so many of the things that I went through, now luckily I have the most supportive spouse in the world. And when I told him, I looked at him one day and I was like, what if I just left my job? Now I had been working with a career coach and I had done all of these other things, but we didn't really have a plan for what was next. I was like, what if I just did it? And he's like, do it, just get out. Right. So that was my plan, so to speak.
Mm.
But then I also had my parents who were like, what the heck are you thinking? And other
No,
people that were like,
there you go.
why would you leave a job that is stable and you make a lot of money and you've got benefits? Why would you possibly leave that to do something that is completely
Yeah.
unstable? That was really hard for me because I felt like I had to prove myself in these other ways, but not for myself. I felt like I had to prove myself to other people. And when you're going through a change like this, I think that's so powerful that you empower these people to do that, because the only person you have to believe in is you. And that mindset is really what's going to get you over the hump to get you to that next place. And there's been
Yeah.
times when I've thought, maybe I should go get a more stable job and a job that's going to have that consistent paycheck over time. But every single time I come back to my own heart and say, absolutely not. You would be miserable. You were miserable. There's a reason why you left. So, what a cool
Yeah.
concept that you do that.
Yeah, I realized how necessary it was when, especially because one of the concepts that Bowles taught me was that of the safekeeping self. And that's the part that wants to keep you in that status quo position, which is what all your
Comfortable.
friends are trying to keep you in. They're trying to keep you there. Like, don't move, don't change it. You're doing great. Not inside. And it's not sustainable. If you're not happy with ADHD, what they don't understand if they're neurotypical is that it is not sustainable, that you can do it for a while. And I always say, if you're going to do it, understand that it's a means to an end. So there is a beginning, middle, and end to it. But during that time, you're going to be exploring what the right path is for you, right? And some people just need to make a break because of conditions within the workplace. There's some company situations that people are working in, and we hear about this nonstop. Everybody talks about their own situations, and there's so many really difficult cultures, company cultures, and environments that really make it difficult for people with ADHD if they don't understand the conditions that they need to thrive in. And it really does start with you. You have to really understand what you need and be able to detail it out and articulate it and say, I need this, I need this, I need these physical conditions, I need this kind of environment, I need to work with these kind of people. I need to have people that I can relate to and people that aren't competing with me. And I can't be in a company that's not allowing me the freedom to get up and walk around or to have some flexibility where I can get time off when I need it. I mean, if you don't have these things detailed out and this information actually accessible and have the knowledge of what you need personally to thrive, then you can go into these environments for a while, like I said, but if it's not what you really want to be doing, if you're not happy, eventually it's going to shut down. It's not sustainable.
I went through this period of time where I had transitioned to a different leadership group in a different region of the States. And I started working with these people. And this one woman gave me such pushback on me having a designated time for my lunch every single day. I blocked it off on my calendar, but she gave me hell because she didn't think that I should be taking an hour during the day to take care of myself. She brought it to our boss. And it was a hill I was ready to die on because I'm like, I know that in order for me to be productive, even in the least bit, I've got to have, this was not even someone above me who was giving me a hard time. It was a peer of mine who could not understand. Now, at the same time, coming from a hustle culture where we're expected to be at our desks and go, go, go all day long, that is not something where people with ADHD can thrive. If you're not taking regular breaks, we can burn out so easily. And so, yeah, I died on that hill. I was like, you don't like my lunch? Then you're going to have to go and cry about it in a corner because I'm still going to take my lunch. But it also made that corporate environment not a healthy environment because it almost felt like I had to prove myself to someone who was just a peer of mine. You know what I'm really curious about, because you're an entrepreneur, I am now an entrepreneur, and I meet so many people with ADHD who are entrepreneurs. Yeah. Aside from, I know I don't want to work for someone else. You don't want to work for someone else. But why else do you feel like people with ADHD so often choose the entrepreneurial route when it comes to their career?
For the very reasons we're talking about now.
Yeah.
Ultimately, we don't want people telling us what to do. And we don't want, if we know something's good for us, we don't want somebody judging us, hanging over us and, micromanaging us, especially if they're a peer. Oh my gosh, I can't even imagine what that would have been like. I mean, I would have put out such a fuss that I probably would have been fired, because it just isn't an environment I would want to be in. So I would be very rebellious. A lot of us have a very kind of rebellious nature. So it's kind of the good, the bad, and the ugly. Like, yes, we're very entrepreneurial, and yes, we are the movers and shakers in the world. And we're the ones that come up with the products and services that you see people using and benefiting from everywhere. You've heard of the big people out there, the billionaires with ADHD, right?
Oh, yeah, I believe it.
You think they're going to answer to anybody? They're not answering to anybody. They probably never did. Or they were, I don't know, they shook the system years before. But entrepreneurs, it's always a challenge. And people always say, well, I'm afraid I'll just screw up and I can't start my own business or do my own thing because of my ADHD. And I always say, well, that's because you don't know what supports you need. You haven't really understood that you're going to need other people to help you, that you can't do it all alone. And I always say, never even think about it. Never even consider doing it on your own. You've got to have help from other people and you've got to understand what kind of help you need. And sometimes it's trial and error, which it was for me. I mean, I now have a virtual assistant that I've had for almost 4 years now, it took me a long time to find somebody like her. She just makes my life so much easier. I mean, she's one of these people where I'll say, this is what I want to do. And she'll say, here's 3 different ways you can choose, pick one.
Wow.
For one thing, my class would never exist if it weren't for her because she built the whole back office for me. And she makes sure everything gets out and everybody's followed up with and gets the support they need. But I know I could never have done that without her. So I credit her with a lot. And she knows it too. She knows it. I let her know all the time. But you have to find people like that are kind of your go-to people and that you trust and get you and they're not going to leave you if you act a little crazy. Occasionally make demands and you don't realize you're trying to get something off your plate and you're forgetting to say, can you please do this? Thank you. So it's really important to understand that if you're going to go and do your own thing, that you have help, that you get that support. I'm sure you do, right?
Yes. And I love that you say that because I'm looking for it more and more. I'm still in my first year, so there's obviously the monetary resources too, but it
Mhm.
wasn't until I was doing my taxes this year and I just started my business last year, so I have to incorporate that. And I had a little
Mhm.
bit of a breakdown. I was like, "Oh my gosh, I kept putting it off and putting it off." And I've always kind of loved doing my taxes because I like when I make things add up and I like numbers. I like budgeting. That's just something I've I like to organize budgets. That's something that I like to do. But when it came
Mhm.
to my taxes, I felt so overwhelmed. And then I felt like I had to learn the entire tax system so that I could do it the best that I possibly could. And sometimes that's how our brains work. It's like all or nothing. And I was like, I just want to do nothing because this all feels so overwhelming. So it happened that I was on TikTok one day and I found this man, Nathaniel. He is an autistic bookkeeper and prefers to work with business owners that are neurodivergent. And so I reached out to him and he not only organized everything for me as far as just putting things in a place that they needed to be, he then made me a little tree so that I could come in and like, hey, is this incoming or outgoing? So it was just beautiful the way that we just knew how to communicate with one another right away. And I explained to him that it's very hard for me to trust people because I like to be in control. I know that that's a thing that I have. I always have. I know that I can do things really well. It's just a matter of sitting down and learning how to do it. But the truth is, we can't do it all ourselves. But when we find the right people in our business to support us, it gives us so much more space to use our brains for the beauty that they can help develop what we're really in it for.
And one of the ways you can tell if it's the right person, it's like when they get it, when you talk to them and you actually give them something to do and they do it in a way that you're like, "Oh my gosh, I never would have thought of doing it that way."
Yeah.
They get what you're trying to do. There's this understanding, this synergy. I feel very fortunate. I have the best people behind me. And you can't have everybody can have that. It just takes a little bit of time
Yeah.
and recognizing who those people are. I used to get intimidated by people that I was working with, like virtual assistants who would shame me. I felt like they were always telling me I was doing everything wrong. They just didn't get what I was looking for. Whatever they would be doing is something I could kind of do myself, only do it better.
Right.
I'm looking for someone who can do it not only better than me, but have different ways of doing it and can almost read my mind, you know?
Yeah. Absolutely.
If you're going to be an entrepreneur, never ever think in terms of it's just me. It's
Yeah.
got to be people that provide the support that you need. And then you have the freedom. You really do have the freedom at that point to create what you want and move where you want to go in your career. And I'm not saying this is for everybody because I know that most of the people I work with end up going back to work for a corporation or they might go into smaller businesses or medium-sized businesses. It's not immediately for everyone, especially if you're making a shift, a big shift. What I say is go to work for somebody for a few years to lay the foundation, to get the lay of the land. Everybody has their own path, but it's really the process that I do with people is very individualized. And it does really put you in a position to take the deeper dive and to start to understand who you really are and what you really want, which for many people, I would say the majority of people is a new journey because very few of us, if any, have been taught how to make these decisions, how to choose the best career path, how to even lay the foundation for that, and how to grow a path, whether it's starting to work with someone and then working on your own or just continuing in a certain kind of position that you want to grow into, which for us doesn't necessarily mean the typical corporate ladder kind of thing. It could mean going into a lateral move of some kind or taking on, different kinds of tasks that fit us the best, but knowing how to communicate what we need in the workplace. That's the key, is really knowing how to communicate your needs and not being afraid to do it. And when you know you need something and it's not coming forth or you're being cut off for whatever reason, then it's important to know that this may not be the best fit. So recognizing that as well. And I always like to say, if you're not happy in the work you're doing, if you're dreading going to work every day, if you're finding you're in what I call a soul crushing situation and you feel like you can't get out or there's no other route for you, you are in the wrong job. It's just not the right fit. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. You're not doing anything wrong. It's just the wrong fit.
Isn't Shell amazing? That was part one of a two-part interview I did with Shell Mendelson. The link to her book is in the show notes below. And I have a whole juicy second episode coming on Wednesday so that you can see the rest of our interview. I'll also drop all of the takeaways from that show in the second episode as well. I hope you're enjoying the interview so far. One thing I had to share, I was thinking about this morning. I am so excited to see where people are listening from. There's so many incredible places that people tune in from that I've literally never even heard of before. I want to drop some of the cities below and shout out to you wherever you're listening from. We've got Everett, Massachusetts, McCordsville, Indiana, Brookfield, Wisconsin, Columbus, Georgia, Baltimore, Maryland, San Francisco, California, Myrna, Georgia, Detroit, Michigan, Waltham, Massachusetts, Livingston, Montana, Shreveport, Louisiana, Ames, Iowa, Mesa, Arizona. Shout out to my husband's hometown. Cambridge, Massachusetts, South Hamilton, Massachusetts. I'm from Massachusetts, so we've got a lot of listeners there. Bedford, Pennsylvania, Dover, Delaware, West Kelowna, British Columbia. What? That's so cool. Fort Mill, South Carolina, Malden, Massachusetts, Monterey, Massachusetts, Beverly Hills, Florida. And then some of the countries that are tuning in are pretty incredible too. It's countries and territories. Whoever listened from Latvia, you are incredible. Norway, Australia. I know I have some friends down in New Zealand, South Africa, Ireland, Italy. Pretty incredible that this podcast is being reached throughout the entire world. It's such a joy to come to you each week and to help you start to think about your stuff in a different way. You all deserve so much to live a life where your stuff is not overwhelming you. Just want you to know that. And you are so capable of doing that. If you want to get started right away, reach out to me. I dropped a link to my calendar in the show notes below so that you can get in touch with me right now and find a spot on my calendar, see if coaching is the right option for you. I also do some individual decluttering sessions. So if that makes more sense for you too, check that out as well. I'll see you on Wednesday. The content of this podcast is for informational purposes only and does not constitute medical advice. I am not a doctor or medical professional. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard on this podcast. Oh, I did this new feature where you can actually send me a text message. So if you scroll down to the show notes, you can click a little button and it'll send me a text. Share your thoughts. It's so easy because there's a button for it. So cool. I mean, there's other ways to get in touch with me in the show notes too, but try it out. You guys are amazing. If you would like to support the podcast in any way, shape, or form, please consider joining my Patreon account where I'll post some additional content and some wise words from me, if you will. Join my Facebook page, like and share this podcast with whomever you think could benefit. I also have this amazing woman who is my friend. She owns a small batch skincare business in Colorado, and I have been using her CBD bath bombs forever. And I have a code that you can use to save 10%. If you use that code, you can order bath bombs for yourself and have it sent to you. I actually just had my father order the direct pain cream, and it is incredible. I use it for cramps, and he used it for his knee that was giving him a ton of pain. And he looked at me after he put it on. First, I had to promise him he's not going to get high, right? And he laughed at me, but also I think he was relieved that I confirmed that for him. But he looked at me and he was like, I can't believe this is working right now. He's taking aspirin, he's taking all of these other things to try to get the pain to diminish in any way. And this direct pain cream works. So check it out. Use my code to save money and you can have it shipped to you. So it doesn't matter where you are. Additionally, me and my husband use HelloFresh. I'm not sponsored by them in any way. So these are literally just free boxes that we can give away. So I put a code down in the show notes below. If you sign up for a free box, then we get to feed our family for a week for free. So thank you so much for supporting us. And you get to eat as well. So how about that? What a world we get to live in.